What happens when a single moment of courage collides with a world of unimaginable power? For Phoebe Quinn, a waitress drowning in debt and family obligations. It was just another Tuesday, another shift of forced smiles and clearing half-eaten plates of food that cost more than her weekly groceries. But on this Tuesday she served a man whose cold stare could freeze fire a man who treated people like pieces on a chessboard. She decided to say something. She chose to speak up for the invisible, the unheard. She expected to be fired. What she didn't expect was the gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom that appeared outside her apartment the very next day, sent to escort her from her world of linoleum floors to a glass tower where billionaires decided the fate of thousands. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a performance. Located in the heart of the city's financial district, it catered to a clientele who saw its exorbitant prices as a feature, not a bug. The cutlery was sterling silver. The tablecloths were Egyptian cotton, and the chandeliers were Venetian crystal. Each droplet of glass seeming to weep light onto the patrons below. But for the staff who moved silently through this opulent theatre, it was a gilded cage, and its warden was the manager, Mr. Peterson. Phoebe Quinn knew the performance better than anyone. For 2 years, she had perfected the art of the unobtrusive presence. She could refill a water glass without a ripple clear a plate, without a clink, and produce a smile that never quite reached her tired grey eyes. At 26, she was a ghost in a crisp black uniform, haunting the space between the kitchen's chaotic heat and the dining room's refrigerated calm. Every dollar she earned was meticulously budgeted. A third for the rent on her tiny, drafty apartment. A third for the ever-growing pile of medical bills for her mother's failing health back in Ohio. The final third was for her younger sister, Chloe, a brilliant art history student at a state university, whose tuition was a constant looming threat. Phoebe's own dreams of being a graphic designer were locked away in a sketchbook under her bed, gathering dust alongside her hopes. Quinn Table 7 needs their check, and the couple at Table 12 looks like they're ready for dessert menus. Move. Mr. Peterson's voice was a low hiss, slick with a sycophant's charm for the guests, and dripping with contempt for his staff. He was a man of medium height and 0 stature, his thinning hair plastered to his scalp as if in permanent surrender. He policed the dining room with the anxious energy of a stray dog, terrified of his masters and cruel to anything smaller than himself. On it, Mr. Peterson Phoebe said, her voice a practiced monotone. She moved toward Table 7, a blur of efficient grace. Her co-worker, Lena, a sharp-witted woman with a perpetually cynical smirk, caught her eye as she passed the service station. "Don't let him get to you," Lena whispered, polishing a wine glass with vigor. "He's extra jumpy tonight. Rumor is someone from corporate is doing a surprise audit of the district's properties." Phoebe raised an eyebrow. "Corporate. Here. They own us, they don't dine with us." "That's the point," Lena said, her voice dropping lower. "They come in incognito. See how the sausage is really made. Or in this case, how the $300 Wagyu is seared." Phoebe's stomach tightened. An audit meant Peterson would be at his absolute worst, his anxiety trickling down to curdle the entire shift. It meant every tiny infraction a fork placed at the wrong angle, a moment's hesitation, would be grounds for a tirade in the kitchen. It was around 8 p.m. when he walked in. He was alone, which was unusual for a Tuesday night at the Gilded Sparrow. Men like him usually traveled in packs, their boisterous laughter and expensive cologne announcing their arrival long before they reached the hostess stand. This man was different. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, his presence sucking the ambient noise from his immediate vicinity. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Phoebe's car, with silver hair cut with military precision. His face was a roadmap of stern lines and quiet authority, but it was his eyes that held you captive. They were the color of a winter sky, pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth. They didn't just look at things. They assessed, catalogued, and dismissed them. Peterson practically sprinted to greet him, his usual oily smile stretched into a rictus of panic. The man waved him away with a flick of his wrist, a gesture of such casual dismissal that Peterson actually flinched. He chose a small two-person table in a corner that offered a panoramic view of the entire dining room. "Quinn, you take him," Peterson hissed, pushing Phoebe forward. "And you be perfect. Do you understand me? Perfect." Phoebe's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed down her apron, took a deep, steadying breath, and approached the table. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Gilded Sparrow. May I start you off with some water?" she asked, her voice calm and even. The man didn't look at her. His gaze was sweeping the room, his head still. It was like watching a predator scan the savannah. Sparkling. "San Pellegrino. 1 lime wedge, not a lemon." "Of course, sir." For the next hour, serving him was like serving a statue. He ordered the most expensive items on the menu, the seared foie gras, the dry-aged rib-eye, a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than her month's rent, but he barely seemed to taste them. He ate with a detached mechanical precision, his eyes constantly roving. He wasn't enjoying a meal. He was gathering data. Phoebe felt less like a waitress and more like a specimen under a microscope. Every time she approached, she could feel his peripheral attention on her, judging her posture, her movements, her very existence in his space. The simmering tension in the restaurant finally boiled over near the kitchen doors. Leo, a young busboy of 17, saving up for community college, was rushing to clear a large table. He was a good kid, nervous and eager to please. In his haste, a heavy ceramic plate slipped from the top of his stack, crashing to the marble floor, with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the hushed dining room. Silence fell. Every diner turned to stare. Leo froze his face, draining of all color, as he looked at the shattered remains of the plate. Peterson was on him in a second. He didn't yell. He did something far worse. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow audible to Phoebe from 20 feet away. "You clumsy, worthless idiot!" Peterson breathed, his face contorted with rage. "Do you know how much that plate costs? It's coming out of your pay, all of it. In fact, you're so incompetent you might not have any pay left by the time I'm done with you." Leo's eyes welled up with tears. He was trembling, trying to stammer an apology, but Peterson cut him off. "Get on your knees and pick it up. Now. And don't you dare miss a single shard." Phoebe watched her blood turning to ice and then just as quickly to fire. She saw not just a terrified teenager, but a reflection of her own father. He had worked for 30 years at a manufacturing plant, a loyal, hard-working man. After a corporate buyout, a new manager, a man just like Peterson, had come in. He'd systematically humiliated the older workers, chipping away at their dignity until they were broken. Her father had been forced into early retirement, losing a part of his pension and all of his spirit. He'd withered away, a proud man reduced to a shell, and died 2 years later. The doctors called it a heart attack. Phoebe knew he had died of a broken heart. Something inside her snapped. The carefully constructed walls of professional detachment crumbled to dust. She saw Peterson's boot pressing down on Leo's neck, and she saw the cold, indifferent eyes of the man in the charcoal suit watching the entire exchange with the mild interest of someone observing an insect. He was watching. He was seeing this cruelty, this abuse, and he was doing nothing. In his silence there was complicity. Phoebe set the silver water pitcher down on her service tray with a soft click. She turned and walked not to her next table, but directly toward the man in the corner. Her footsteps were soundless on the plush carpet, but her approach felt like a seismic event in the charged atmosphere of the dining room. Lena saw her coming, and her eyes widened in a silent, desperate plea. "Don't do it, Phoebe. Turn back." But Phoebe's gaze was locked on the man in the corner, a man who represented every faceless executive, every indifferent shareholder, every bottom-line obsessed tyrant who had ever crushed a good person for the sake of efficiency. She stopped at his table. He didn't look up immediately, instead taking a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, as if giving her a final chance to reconsider her monumental error in judgment. When he finally raised his pale blue eyes to meet hers, they were flat and cold like polished stones. "Is there a problem?" His voice was low, resonant, and carried an implicit threat. It was the voice of a man who had never been questioned. Phoebe's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her voice when it came was steady. "Yes, sir. There is." A flicker of something surprise-annoyance crossed his features before being suppressed. And what might that be? She took a breath. "You've been watching the staff all night. I've seen you. You're not just having dinner." She gestured subtly with her head toward the scene still unfolding near the kitchen, where Leo was now on his hands and knees, his shoulders shaking as he picked up pieces of broken ceramic under Peterson's hawk-like glare. "You just saw a manager publicly humiliate a teenage boy, threaten his livelihood and strip him of his dignity over a broken plate." She said, her voice quiet, but ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. "You saw it, and you did nothing." The man set his wine glass down. The small sound seemed to echo in the space between them. "I am a customer. That is an internal staff matter. It has nothing to do with me." "Doesn't it?" Phoebe challenged, leaning forward slightly, her professionalism forgotten. "You come here. You pay for the food, the wine, the ambiance. But you're also paying for us, for the people. You're paying for Leo to carry your empty plates. You're paying for me to pour your water. Our service is part of the product you're consuming, and you just watched the product get treated like garbage." She felt a reckless energy surge through her, the exhilarating terror of someone who has already decided they have nothing left to lose. "My father," she said, her voice catching for a fraction of a second, before she mastered it. "Worked for the same company for 30 years. He was loyal. He was proud of his work. New management came in. They saw men like him as liabilities on a spreadsheet. They broke his spirit to save a few dollars on a balance sheet. He's dead now. People think loyalty is a one-way street, something an employee gives to a company. They're wrong. It's a bridge, and it has to be built from both sides. A place like this, any business, isn't built on crystal chandeliers or expensive wine. It's built on people. And when you treat people like they are disposable, the foundation rots. You might not see it from your corner table, but the whole thing, it's already collapsing." She finished, her chest heaving slightly, the silence in the room pressing in on her. She had just lectured a man who could likely buy the entire city block. She had unpacked a lifetime of grief and anger onto his perfectly set table. The man stared at her. His face was an unreadable mask of granite. He didn't speak for a long, agonizing minute. He simply looked at her, and for the first time, Phoebe felt he was truly seeing her, not as a uniform or a function, but as a person. His gaze was so intense, it was almost physical, probing past her anger to the raw conviction beneath. Finally, he blinked. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice still devoid of emotion. "Phoebe. Phoebe Quinn." He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He reached into his suit jacket, produced a thick leather wallet, and extracted several crisp $100 bills, placing them neatly on the table. It was far more than the bill. Then he stood, his tall frame unfolding from the chair. He adjusted his suit jacket, gave her one last lingering look, and then turned and walked out of the restaurant without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, the spell was broken. Mr. Peterson, his face purple with apoplectic rage, stormed over to her. "What did you do?" he screeched, his voice cracking. "What in God's name did you just do?" "I told him the truth," Phoebe said, her body starting to tremble now that the adrenaline was fading. "The truth." Peterson laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "You are a waitress. Your truth doesn't matter. You just harassed a VIP guest. You are a liability. You are a nobody. You're fired, Quinn. Get your things and get out of my restaurant. Now." Lena rushed to her side as Phoebe stood stunned. "Phoebe, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking of my dad." Phoebe whispered, her eyes stinging. "I was thinking of Leo." She walked to the small, cramped locker room in the basement, her legs feeling like lead. She changed out of her uniform, the symbol of her invisibility, and put on her own worn jeans and t-shirt. As she walked out the back alley door, the stench of garbage and stale grease filling her lungs. The reality of what she had done crashed down upon her. She was jobless. She had no savings. Her mother's next prescription was due. Chloe's next tuition payment was a month away. She had spoken her truth, and her truth had cost her everything. Walking home through the cold, indifferent city streets, Phoebe Quinn had never felt so alone. She had done the right thing, she was sure of it. But in a world run by men, like the one in the charcoal suit doing the right thing, felt remarkably like ruin. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a miserable grey drizzle that perfectly matched Phoebe's mood. Her apartment, usually a small sanctuary, felt like a cage. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the drip of a leaky faucet and the frantic thumping of her own heart. The reality of her situation had settled in like a damp chill. Fired, no severance, no references. Mr. Peterson would make sure she was blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. She spent the morning in a haze of panic, scrolling through online job boards on her cheap, cracked screen laptop. Data entry clerk, call center operator, warehouse stocker. Each listing felt like another step down, another move away from the life she had once hoped for. She typed out a message to Chloe, a cheerful lie about her shift being great, and promised to send the next portion of her tuition money soon, a promise that tasted like ash in her mouth. How was she going to do it? How was she going to tell her mother she couldn't afford the new medication? The weight of it all was crushing a physical pressure on her chest. She had stood up for her principles, but principles didn't pay the rent. It was just after 11 a.m. when the sound reached her. It was a low, powerful purr, an engine so finely tuned it sounded less like a machine and more like a large, contented predator. It was a sound that didn't belong on her street of cracked pavement, overflowing bins, and weary 3-story walk-ups. Curious, she pulled back the edge of her worn curtain and looked down. Her breath caught in her throat. Parked directly in front of her building, taking up nearly 2 parking spaces, was a car. But to call it a car was an insult. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its body a flawless, gleaming black that seemed to absorb the dreary grey light and radiate a dark, formidable power. Its iconic silver grille looked like a Roman temple, and the spirit of ecstasy on the bonnet seemed to be taking flight from the squalor of the neighborhood. People on the street had stopped to stare their phones out, murmuring in disbelief. Phoebe's first thought was that it was a mistake. A celebrity or a diplomat must have gotten lost. Then she saw the chauffeur. He stepped out of the driver's side, a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored black suit and driving gloves. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a royal guard, his eyes scanning the building numbers before fixing on hers. He walked to the front entrance of her building, and a moment later the intercom buzzed a harsh grating sound that shattered the quiet of her apartment. Her hand trembled as she pressed the talk button. "Hello, Miss Phoebe Quinn." The voice from the speaker was deep, professional, and utterly calm. "Who is this?" "My name is Gideon. I have been sent to collect you. I am with Mr. Hartley." Hartley. The name meant nothing to her. She was about to say he had the wrong person when a cold dread washed over her. The man from the restaurant. The pale blue eyes. The charcoal suit. It had to be him. Was this his idea of a cruel joke? Was he sending a henchman to intimidate her? To serve her with a lawsuit for slander? I don't understand," she stammered. "There is an envelope for you at the front door, Miss Quinn. It should provide some clarification. I will wait." The intercom clicked off. Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the door, hide, and pretend she wasn't home. But what was the point? A man who sends a Rolls-Royce could certainly find another way to get to her. Hesitantly, she unlocked her 3 deadbolts and crept down the creaky stairs. Taped to the inside of the building's main glass door was a thick cream-colored envelope. Her name, Phoebe Quinn, was written on the front in elegant, sharp calligraphy. With shaking fingers, she tore it open. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legal jargon that promised severe financial penalties if she were to speak of the day's events to anyone. The second was a single sheet of heavy cardstock. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons. It read, "Miss Quinn, your presence is requested at a meeting today at 1:00 p.m. Location Hartley Tower, 1100 Polaris Avenue, 95th floor. Transport has been provided. A change of attire will be made available. Your compliance is expected." It was unsigned. No explanation, no reason. Just a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of politeness. Hartley Tower. The name finally clicked. It was one of the tallest, most iconic skyscrapers in the city, a glittering needle of glass and steel that dominated the skyline. It was the global headquarters of Hartley Holdings, a sprawling multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with interests in everything from luxury hotels and real estate to technology and logistics. The man from the restaurant wasn't just a rich customer. He was Mason Hartley, the reclusive, notoriously ruthless CEO. A legend in the financial world, known for his cold-blooded acquisitions and his utter intolerance for failure. Phoebe leaned against the wall, the cardstock trembling in her hand. This was so much worse than a lawsuit. This was a king summoning a peasant to his castle. Why to fire her from a job she no longer had? To humiliate her on a grander scale. She looked back at the NDA. The penalties were astronomical figures with more zeros than she could comprehend. It was a cage. Then she looked at the summons. It was a door. She had no idea what was behind it, but her current reality was a dead-end street. She thought of her mother, of Chloe, of the pile of bills on her kitchen table. What did she have left to lose? Her dignity. She'd spent that defending someone else's. A strange sort of calm settled over her. It was the calm of the free fall after you've been pushed from the cliff. She walked back up to her apartment, ran a brush through her hair, and put on the nicest, cleanest black trousers and simple white blouse she owned. It felt woefully inadequate, like armor made of paper. Taking one last look at her tiny apartment, she walked back downstairs out the front door and into the impossible reality of the waiting Rolls-Royce. Gideon, the chauffeur, opened the back door for her without a word. The interior was a cavern of cream-colored leather and polished burr walnut. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing her in, shutting out the entire world she knew. The silence inside the car was absolute. As the ghost glided away from the curb, Phoebe looked back at her building, a place of struggle and safety, and felt like she was leaving a part of herself behind forever. She was no longer just Phoebe Quinn, the waitress. She was a woman on her way to see a king, with no idea if she was the guest of honor or the sacrifice. The journey to Hartley Tower was a surreal glide through a city Phoebe suddenly didn't recognize. From the hushed, leather-scented interior of the Rolls-Royce, the familiar streets looked alien, like a film set viewed from the director's chair. The usual cacophony of sirens, horns, and shouting was reduced to a distant, ignorable hum. People on the sidewalks blurred into a faceless stream. This, she realized, was how the other half lived, insulated, protected, moving through the world, without ever truly touching it. Gideon drove with silent, unnerving competence. He didn't speak, and the partition between the driver and passenger cabin was raised, affording her complete privacy. It wasn't a comfort. It was a statement. She was cargo being transported, a problem being delivered to its destination. She clutched her worn handbag in her lap, its cracked pleather a stark contrast to the immaculate surroundings. Hartley Tower loomed larger with every passing block. It wasn't just a building. It was a monument to power, a sheer cliff of dark glass that seemed to challenge the sky itself. As they pulled into a private subterranean entrance, massive steel gates slid silently open to receive them, and then closed behind, sealing them into the belly of the beast. Gideon opened her door. "This way, Miss Quinn." He led her not through a public lobby, but into a private elevator bank, all polished black marble and brushed steel. There were no buttons. Gideon placed his thumb on a small, unmarked scanner, and the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The 95th floor. He said his first words since the apartment. He did not get in with her. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent. There was no lurch, no sensation of movement, only the soft whisper of its flight and the rapidly changing numbers on a small digital display. 70. 80. 90. It was a rocket launch into another stratosphere of wealth and influence. The doors opened directly into a reception area that was larger than Phoebe's entire apartment building floor. The floors were white Italian marble, The walls were panelled in a pale wood she couldn't name, and the entire west-facing wall was a single pane of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city sprawling below. A single enormous abstract painting, pulsing with vibrant reds and blues, hung on the opposite wall. It was probably worth more than every possession she had ever owned combined. Behind a monolithic desk of sculpted white quartz sat a woman who seemed as flawlessly designed as the office itself. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent features, raven hair pulled back into a severe but elegant chignon, and she wore a tailored suit of pearl grey that screamed bespoke. She looked up as Phoebe stepped out of the elevator, her expression a perfectly neutral mask of professionalism. "Miss Quinn," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I am Genevieve Dubois, Mr. Hartley's executive assistant. Please come with me." Her heels clicked with quiet authority on the marble as she led Phoebe down a long, silent hallway. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive perfume and clean, filtered air. They passed glass-walled offices where people in sharp suits worked with a silent, intense focus. A few looked up as Phoebe passed their faces, betraying a flicker of curiosity at the sight of this obviously out-of-place woman in their sanitized world. Dubois stopped at an unmarked door and opened it. "We have a brief window before the meeting. Please change into this. It would be more appropriate." The room was a small private lounge, exquisitely furnished. Laid out on a velvet chaise longue was a simple but beautifully cut navy blue sheath dress, a pair of low, elegant black heels, and a string of delicate pearls. Phoebe stared at the clothes, a flush of humiliation warming her cheeks. They wanted to erase every trace of her old life, dress her up like a tool for whatever performance was about to take place. It was a power move, a way of reminding her that she was here on their terms, in their world, wearing their costume. For a moment she wanted to refuse to cling to her own identity. But what choice did she have? Refusing would only get her sent home back to her pile of bills and her jobless despair. Swallowing her pride, she nodded. "Thank you." Genevieve Dubois gave a small, tight smile. "There is a powder room through there. I will be just outside. We have 10 minutes. The door closed, leaving Phoebe alone with her borrowed identity. The dress slid on like it was made for her, the fabric cool and heavy. The shoes fit perfectly. As she looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress gave her an unfamiliar silhouette of competence and poise. The simple pearls lent an air of gravity. They had transformed Phoebe Quinn, the waitress, into someone who looked like she belonged. It was unsettling. She felt like an imposter, a spy in enemy territory. When she stepped out, Ms. Dubois gave her a quick, appraising glance and nodded a silent mark of approval. "This way. The meeting has already begun. We will enter quietly." She led Phoebe to a pair of massive, imposing oak doors. She didn't knock. She simply pushed one open, holding it for Phoebe to enter. Phoebe's first sensation was of being thrown into a shark tank. The boardroom was vast and intimidating. A colossal table of dark, polished mahogany dominated the space, surrounded by at least 20 high-backed leather chairs. Most were occupied by men and a few women, all impeccably dressed, their faces a mixture of shrewd intelligence, predatory ambition, and bored entitlement. Laptops were open, documents were spread out, and the air was thick with the low murmur of a presentation in progress. And at the head of the table, commanding the room with his sheer presence, sat Mason Hartley. He looked different here in his element. He wasn't a customer anymore. He was a king on his throne. His pale blue eyes swept over Phoebe as she entered, and for a fleeting moment she saw the same cold assessment as the night before. He gave a tiny, almost invisible nod to Ms. Dubois, who silently took a seat at a smaller desk against the wall, her fingers immediately flying across a tablet. All eyes in the room turned to Phoebe, their conversation ceasing. She felt 100 pairs of eyes dissecting her, questioning her presence. Who was she? Why was she here? The judgment was a palpable force. A heavy-set man with a florid face and a sneer already forming on his lips spoke up, his voice booming with arrogance. "Mason, we're in the middle of Q3 logistics projections. Who is this? Did your new secretary get lost?" Laughter rippled around the table. Phoebe's face burned. Mason Hartley held up a hand, and the room fell instantly silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His power was absolute. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice calm and cutting. "Apologies for the interruption. This is Miss Phoebe Quinn." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "She is not a secretary. I've brought her here today as a special consultant." A wave of confused murmuring broke out. The florid-faced man whom Phoebe would later learn was Leland Roche, a rival board member and head of a powerful investment faction, scoffed audibly. A consultant, Roche said with disbelief. "On what catering?" The sneer was back wider this time. Phoebe felt small, exposed a joke in a room full of titans. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Mason's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign of his displeasure. "On corporate culture, Mr. Roche. On employee morale. On the rot that festers in the foundations of our acquisitions, while we are all up here admiring the view from the 95th floor." He let that sink in. The mood in the room shifted from mockery to tense confusion. "As you know." Mason continued, his gaze sweeping the table. "Our recent acquisition, the Vivid Restaurant Group, has been underperforming significantly. Your reports," he gestured to a stack of binders, "blame market saturation and supply chain issues. You have all advised me to divest to cut our losses." He paused again, his timing impeccable. "I, however, decided on a more hands-on approach. Last night I dined at one of our premier establishments from that group, the Gilded Sparrow. I went incognito to see for myself." A palpable shock went through the room. Leland Roche's smug expression faltered. Mason's gaze finally settled back on Phoebe, who stood frozen by the door. "Miss Quinn was my waitress, and she provided me with an analysis more insightful and more valuable than this entire stack of reports combined." He looked directly at Leland Roche, a predatory gleam in his eye. "It seems our problem isn't the supply chain, Leland. It's the people chain, and it's broken." He then turned his full attention to Phoebe. The entire boardroom, filled with some of the most powerful people in the country, followed his gaze. The weight of their collective stare was suffocating. "Miss Quinn Mason Hartley," commanded, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Please, come to the front and tell the board exactly what you told me last night." Time seemed to slow down. The 30 feet from the door to the head of the table felt like a mile-long walk across a precarious tightrope. Every eye in the room was on Phoebe, a burning, analytical gaze that stripped away the navy blue dress and saw only the waitress beneath. Her legs felt unsteady, her palms were slick with sweat. This was it, the moment of truth. She wasn't just being tested, she was being used. She was a piece on Mason Hartley's chessboard, a surprise move designed to throw his opponents off balance. She reached the front of the room, standing beside the monolithic table, feeling utterly dwarfed by its scale and the power seated around it. She looked at Mason Hartley. His face was implacable, offering no encouragement, no reassurance. He was a general ordering a soldier into the breach. Then she looked at the faces of the board members. She saw skepticism, arrogance, and outright dismissal in their eyes. In Leland Roach's sneer, she saw Mr. Peterson. In their collective indifference, she saw the cold, uncaring system that had broken her father. And just like that, the fear was gone, replaced by a surge of white-hot clarity. She wasn't a pawn. She was a witness. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and met Leland Roach's mocking gaze directly. "Mr. Hartley asked me to tell you what I told him," she began, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. "But to do that, you have to understand where I'm from. I don't live on the 95th floor. Until yesterday, my world was the service entrance, the kitchen, the space between tables. It's a world you own, but you do not see." She paused, letting her words settle in the tomb-like silence. "Last night at the Gilded Sparrow." "Your Gilded Sparrow." "I watched a manager verbally abuse a 17-year-old busboy in the middle of the dining room. He called him worthless. He threatened his job. He made him get on his hands and knees to pick up a broken plate while the boy was trying not to cry. All because of a simple mistake." She looked around the table from one impassive face to another. "Your reports probably tell you that the Gilded Sparrow has a high staff turnover rate. You probably attribute that to the service industry being transient. You write it off as a cost of doing business. But have you ever considered the real cost?" Her voice grew more passionate, fueled by years of pent-up frustration. "The real cost is Leo, the busboy, going home last night, feeling worthless. Maybe deciding that hard work doesn't pay off if you can be humiliated like that. The real cost is the rest of the staff watching it happen, learning that the only way to survive is to keep your head down to do the bare minimum to avoid being the next target. Fear doesn't inspire excellence. It breeds mediocrity. It kills creativity. It makes people work just hard enough not to get fired." Leland Roche let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mason, are we really getting a lecture on feelings from a waitress? This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a therapy session. We're talking about profit and loss, not hurt feelings." Phoebe turned to him, her eyes flashing. "I'm not talking about feelings, Mr. Roach. I'm talking about your assets. You see that busboy as an expense line. I see him as the person who ensures the table is ready for your next $100-a-head customer. You see the kitchen staff as a payroll number. I see them as the people who guarantee the quality of the food your entire brand is built on. You think loyalty is something you demand. I'm telling you it's something you have to earn, and you are not earning it." She pointed a finger, a gesture she couldn't believe she was making at the stack of reports on the table. "That pile of paper tells you what is happening. It tells you revenues are down. I'm telling you why. It's because the foundation is rotten. It's rotten with fear, disrespect, and a culture where managers are rewarded for bullying people into compliance. You can't build a luxury brand on a foundation of misery. The customers might not see the cracks yet, but they can taste it in the food. They can feel it in the tense service. The whole building is groaning and you're all up here, arguing about the color of the curtains." She finished, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The room was utterly still. She had done it. She had said everything. She fully expected to be thrown out by security. Leland Roche opened his mouth to deliver what would have undoubtedly been a scathing dismissal. But Mason Hartley cut him off, not with a word, but by holding up a single commanding finger. Hartley's eyes, those chips of pale blue ice, had a strange light in them. He looked at Roche, but his words were for the entire room. "Roche is right about one thing," Hartley said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "Feelings are irrelevant in this room. Sentimentality is a cancer to good business." He then turned that icy gaze on Phoebe. Miss Quinn, however, is not talking about sentiment. She is talking about metrics. She is talking about efficiency. She is talking about brand integrity. She is describing a systemic failure that exposes this company to risk. He stood up, walking slowly around the end of the table until he was standing not far from Phoebe, presenting a united front. "Let me translate Miss Quinn's lecture into a language you all understand. Leland," he said, his voice dropping. "High turnover, which she correctly identifies as a symptom of poor management costs. This company millions of dollars a year in recruitment and training. A culture of fear, which she so eloquently described, leads to higher rates of mistakes waste and what the lawyers call constructive dismissal lawsuits. A collapse in service quality. The direct result of demoralized staff damages our brand and asset worth billions. An asset you are all sworn to protect." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, his knuckles white. "Miss Quinn, in 10 minutes, has provided a more accurate and actionable diagnosis of our problem than the 6-figure consulting firm we hired to produce these useless reports. She didn't use a spreadsheet. She used her eyes. She identified the human element, the one variable that none of you in your ivory towers ever bother to properly account for." He looked around the table, his authority absolute. "The proposal to divest the Vivid Restaurant Group is denied. Instead, we are going to fix it. We are going to start by cleaning house at the management level, and our first step will be guided by the principles Miss Quinn has just laid out." He looked at Phoebe, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. It was a sliver of respect, a flicker of something that looked almost like vindication. He had brought her here as a weapon, and she had proven to be sharper and more effective than even he had anticipated. The board was stunned into silence. Leland Roche sat back in his chair, his face a mask of thunderous defeat. Phoebe Quinn, the waitress, had just won a battle in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. The board meeting concluded in a state of disarray and muted shock. The agenda was shattered. Mason Hartley had seized control of the narrative, using Phoebe's raw, unfiltered testimony as a battering ram against the board's complacency. As the members filed out, they cast furtive, resentful glances at Phoebe, who still stood by the head of the table, feeling as though she'd just survived a hurricane. Leland Roche shot her a look of pure venom before storming out, his defeat radiating from him like heat. When the room was empty, only Phoebe Mason Hartley and the silent, ever-present Genevieve Dubois remained. The immense power and tension that had filled the space moments before dissipated, leaving a heavy, expectant silence. "You may sit down, Miss Quinn," Hartley said, gesturing to the chair beside him, the one Leland Roche had just vacated. Hesitantly, she sat. The leather was cool and smooth. She felt as though she were sitting on a throne that did not belong to her. Hartley sat as well, steepling his fingers in front of him. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable once more. "You have a formidable quality, Miss Quinn," he said, finally. You speak with a conviction that is rare. And as it turns out, highly effective. I just said what I thought was true, Phoebe said quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. Truth is a commodity, Hartley replied coolly. And in a room like that, unvarnished truth is the rarest commodity of all, which makes it incredibly valuable. Genevieve Dubois stepped forward, holding a tablet. We have already begun the termination process for Mr. Peterson at the Gilded Sparrow. An internal audit team is being dispatched to review every manager in the Vivid portfolio, effective immediately. Phoebe's eyes widened. It was happening. Real change. That's good, she stammered. For Leo, for the others, it's good for my balance sheet. Hartley corrected her, though without his earlier harshness. Happy, respected employees do not steal from you. They do not slack off. They take pride in their work. They protect the brand. Your father, as you mentioned. That loyalty he gave for 30 years. His former company squandered it. They were fools. He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers. Which brings me to you, Miss Quinn. Your previous employment has been terminated. Through no fault of my own, I should add, though my presence was the catalyst. I know, she said. I find myself in your debt, he continued. You provided me with the leverage I needed to silence a faction on my board that has been a thorn in my side for months. Roche and his cronies have been pushing for short-term slash-and-burn tactics across the company. You handed me the perfect argument for my own philosophy, long-term stability through foundational strength. He paused. I believe in paying my debts, and I believe in acquiring valuable assets. You, Miss Quinn, are a valuable asset. Phoebe's heart began to pound. I don't understand, sir. I am creating a new position, an entirely new role within Hartley Holdings. There is no title for it yet, because it has never existed before. He looked at Genevieve, who nodded slightly. You would report to no one but me. You would not be based in this tower. You would not sit in meetings. Your job would be to move through my companies, my hotels, my logistics, warehouses, my retail outlets as an anonymous observer, as a customer, as an employee on a temp contract. You would be my eyes and ears on the ground. You would provide me with the unvarnished truth that no one in a suit on the 95th floor is capable of seeing. You would identify the Petersons of my world before they can rot my company from the inside out. He named a salary. It was a number so large, so astronomical, that Phoebe's brain couldn't process it at first. It was more money than her father had made in the last decade of his life. It was enough to pay off her mother's medical bills, secure Chloe's entire university education, and buy a small house, all with the first year's paycheck. It was a life-altering, world-shattering amount of money. She stared at him speechless. This can't be real, she whispered. It is very real, Hartley said. The paperwork is being drawn up by Miss Dubois as we speak. Phoebe's mind, reeling from the shock, began to work again. The initial euphoria gave way to a healthy dose of suspicion. This was too good to be true. There was always a catch. Why, she asked, her voice gaining strength. Why me? You could hire any number of experienced corporate consultants. Because they are compromised, Hartley answered instantly. They tell me what they think I want to hear, or they give me data scrubbed clean of any humanity. They have no concept of what it's like to worry about next month's rent. They have forgotten what dignity feels like to someone who has very little else. You haven't. That is your value. You are authentic. And right now I have more need for authenticity than I do for another Ivy League MBA. And what happens when I'm no longer authentic? She challenged, surprising herself with her own boldness. What happens when I've been living on this salary for a year? When I've forgotten what my old apartment looks like? Won't I become just like them? A flicker of a smile, the first genuine one she had seen, touched Mason Hartley's lips. That Miss Quinn is the gamble I am willing to take, and it is a risk I will require you to actively manage. Part of your role will be to remain grounded. He paused, and his expression became guarded, a shadow passing over his features. My own father built this empire. He was a brilliant man, but a brutal one. He believed people were cogs in a machine. He taught me that. For a long time, I believed it. I am beginning to question his philosophy. You are a part of that re-evaluation. It was a stunning admission, a crack in the granite facade that revealed the man beneath. Phoebe looked from his face to the incredible view of the city, then back. The offer was a golden key, a chance to unlock a future she had never dared to dream of. It was a chance to make a real difference, not just for herself and her family, but for thousands of people like Leo, like her father. But it had to be on her terms. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm. But on one condition. Hartley raised an eyebrow. No one gave him conditions. I don't just want to be your eyes and ears, she stated. I don't want to just be a reporter of problems. I need the authority delegated from you to implement solutions. If I see a manager who needs retraining, I want to be able to mandate it. If I find a policy that is hurting good employees, I want the power to change it. I don't want to write reports that get filed away. I want to fix what's broken. She held her breath, expecting him to laugh, to rescind the offer. Instead, Mason Hartley extended a hand across the vast mahogany table. Miss Quinn, he said, his voice holding a new note of deep respect. It seems I have underestimated you twice in as many days. You have your condition. Welcome to Hartley Holdings. Phoebe reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm, his hand surprisingly warm. As their hands met, it felt like the sealing of a pact, a strange and unlikely alliance between the king of the 95th floor and the waitress from the streets below. She had walked into the Gilded Sparrow as a ghost and walked into Hartley Tower as a joke. But she was walking out as something else entirely. She was walking out as a force for change, armed with the one thing: she'd always had the truth. And now, for the first time, she had the power to make people listen. Phoebe Quinn's story isn't just about a Rolls-Royce and a shocking job offer. It's a powerful reminder that one voice speaking with courage and conviction can echo in the highest halls of power. She stepped into that boardroom not as a victim, but as a witness for the dignity of every person who feels invisible in the shadow of large corporations. Her journey shows us that true strength isn't about the title you hold or the money you have, but about the principles you're willing to fight for. She didn't just get a new job. She sparked a revolution from the inside, proving that the most valuable asset any company has is the respect it shows its people. What would you have done in Phoebe's shoes? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken up? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Your support helps us continue to find and share tales that inspire and empower. Thank you for watching.